Okay, hello, my friend. This is your reading. This is regarding your loved one, Jeremy, who's passed over. Jeremy. I've been dealing with Jeremy for a couple of days, and the most important thing you need to know is that between the ages of 14 and 15, there was like a major thing that happened, like a major split. It's like he was 14 and then something came into his life. It was a person or a thing came into his life, and there was just this major, like he went from one, like bam, into someone else. And he wants you to know that that's like that's what the beginning of his trajectory was in terms of the way his life ended up, if that makes sense. So if you can try and identify what came into his life around 14, 15, it was like there's a definite, he's showing me like the number 14, the number 15, and this cut in between, like a line between. So whatever happened was like this real definite kind of this really definite split between who he was before that and who he became after that. It was really significant for him. The other thing he wants you to know is that he doesn't blame anybody else for his death. He said other people were there, but he said he was on the periphery of some serious shit, he says. He was kind of like on the fringes of this other stuff that was going on. And it inadvertently had an influence on how he died, but he takes full responsibility for how he died. It was his hand as such. And the thing that he mentioned about that is that he feels one of the people who was there, or one of the people who he had, like, who was quite close to him in that circle, was really intensely affected by that, and it changed. I feel like it was a woman, like a young adult. It really changed her life after that, and she kind of decided to go another path, if that makes sense to you. So he's kind of like pleased that his passing had that effect on that person, that it was kind of an example for that person. But he says the reason it hasn't gone further with the police is that it was his fault, sort of. It wasn't anybody else's fault. He doesn't blame anybody else. He takes responsibility for that, and he knew that that's where he was headed, really, and he feels he's not proud of it, but he knows that that's where he was headed. And he had a real what was the word he used? When this thing happened around 14 and 15, when this split happened, he said it kind of activated his what was the word? Far out, sorry. It was like activated his risk-taking gene. That's what it said. His risk-taking gene kind of thing. I don't know if there's such a thing as that, but he said that that's what it was like. It activated some kind of risk-taking gene, and he went from being this kind of young kid who was, pleasant, pretty cool to be around. Like, he really loved his family. I saw him doing, like, enjoying sports and music, and just, being outdoors a lot. I saw him, like, playing sports outdoors and stuff and just enjoying that. And then when this thing came that caused this split, he said it activated this part of him, and it was like a risk-taking gene, where after that he just kind of went wild. Like he just was on this pathway to do the things that he was doing, and it did involve we know what it involves. So yeah, anyway, let's have a little look at what was going on for him. Jeremy, you right, man? Around the time of his passing, just have a little look at that. So anyway, hang on. Okay, Jeremy. Also, there's a grandmother, who he was really, he felt close to. And he felt really ashamed to be around his family as he got older. And he was ashamed. He wanted to be a good brother, but he was ashamed of what he was doing. And funny, I don't know, he had me like driving real fast the other day. I was in my car just driving real fast, and I was like, what the hell? And it was him. And then he had me singing like the Our Father. So I grew up Catholic, so I know I'm kind of relating this to him feeling, he said, I believe in God, and his concept of God was like real old school God. Like he felt really faithful around that. So he's happy since he passed that's kind of like come to be for him. Like he's in a heavenly place where he's surrounded by people he loves. He's surrounded by beautiful energy and so he's cool with that. But anyway, all right, let's have a look. Okay, ready, man? You ready? Oh, okay. So straight away, the devil card. Let's get this. Sorry. Yeah. So straight away, we've got the devil card, which is temptation. We've got the Seven of Cups. The Lovers. All right, so straight away I'm seeing that there's this tension between who he is and what's going on in his life, like this inner tension and inattention. Sorry, that was the Four of Batons and the Nine of Pentacles. 2, 3, 4, 5. The Knight of Cups. 6. The World, 7. 8 is the Five of Batons. 6, 7, 8, 9. 3 of Swords. 2 of Pentacles. Some money around this. Bit of money around this situation. Bit of money involved in his passing, around his passing. Queen of Cups. Okay, so emotions, money and emotions, all right, and the One of Cups. So there's money and emotions around his passing for sure, around the time leading up to his passing in his life. And also feeling extremely tempted, and it's like let's focus. When the Devil card comes up, we look at being tempted to kind of take the easy path, the path of least resistance kind of thing, the path that we're just used to without challenging ourselves. But also it's about feeling constrained by something or chained to something that we know and kind of like bound by that thing and unable to escape from that thing. And that was really how he was identifying himself. Like he really felt at the time of his passing as though he was really constrained by something, constrained by this force in his life that was not allowing him to kind of escape, no matter okay, come on. No matter what avenues he took to kind of get away from that thing, he was always somehow constrained and pulled back and tempted back into it. And that kind of temptation that we look at with the Devil card is like a real physical, mundane, a real base level temptation, like sexuality, anything to do with the body, feeling like satisfied, gratified through the body. Like the devil is a real ego card. It really relates to our body and our feeling of like pandering to our bodies, to our sensory experience in the world. So that's really how he was identifying when he passed. He was really feeling like kind of like chained to this thing. In contrast to that, the relationships that he had available to him were really expansive and broad, and he actually had the ability, the World card, he had these really supportive relationships around him that he could easily have taken advantage of, but he chose not to. So that's interesting. So there was, this kind of within his relationships, these are his intimate relationships, so his like best friends, his lovers, his really closest intimate relationships, the people that he would confide in, they kind of like gave him this opportunity to experience actually quite a great deal and to feel really fulfilled. So that's the people that he had around him were kind of giving him this opportunity to feel really fulfilled, to feel really satisfied, to feel really on top of the world. So that's what was around him in terms of his intimate relationships. We'll go down now to what was happening financially for him in terms of his material life. He has the Seven of Cups, and the Seven of Cups is it's like feeling emotionally fulfilled and successful with his financial situation, or with the materiality in his world. He felt quite emotionally fulfilled by that. When we're looking at opposite that to what he was bringing in from the outside, from other people, we've got the Five of Batons, which is a change in energy around that. So there was some kind of a shift in his material success, or in his sense of feeling materially secure in the world. There was some kind of energetic shift there. So that could have involved some kind of activity around his finances, around like what he was doing to make money, to bring money in. But there was some kind of energetic shift around that could actually have undermined this sense of emotional security in terms of his material wealth. We also look at his physicality in terms of this, because in the second house here we're looking at our own bodies as well. So around the time of his death, even though he had this propensity to want to feel emotionally fulfilled and secure, and as though he like persevered with something here, there definitely was some kind of like a shift energetically within himself, and he'd drawn that down into himself that influenced his physicality and his body. And we're looking here at the he could have actually been in poor health around this time physically. He might have, I did actually pick up on this when I was talking to him. He felt quite weak around the time of his passing, and as though he had actually had some kind of, there was some underlying illness or something going on with him that wasn't, he was, because of his lifestyle and what he was preoccupied with, he wasn't attending to that or hadn't picked up on that. And I'm feeling as though this could be this energetic shift here. But I also feel like he was feeling very emotionally even though he had this propensity to feel like emotionally fulfilled and complete and whatnot, within his that supported his physicality and his lifestyle in terms of his wealth and income, there was some kind of discrepancy. Something was uncomfortable around that. There was definitely something uncomfortable around that, and I feel as though but we'll have a look at that later. With his close friends from growing up, we've got the lovers. So his close friends, his like cousins, the people he grew up with, and his communication around his childhood, and those friends that developed, like those kinds of people that he could always rely on and go back to in his life, including his siblings. He actually has the lovers here. So he definitely saw himself in his friendships, and he cultivated friendships from that time that he brought with him into adulthood, that he really relied on and felt as though they were definitely complementary to him, and in some way supportive of his lifestyle. Communication-wise, I'd say that he probably tended to gravitate towards people who were going to kind of support the way that he thought, that weren't really too challenging for him. The people that kind of were willing to kind of like let him go off on his tangent and just be happy to kind of like not question or challenge him too much, because he didn't really want to be he didn't really want to be challenged too much around that. So I feel as though, and I actually did feel this before, he didn't have the kinds of intimate relationships with his family towards the end there, actually for quite a few years, that he wanted to have, and he was aware of this, and that's something that actually he wanted to kind of apologize for, or actually bring to the front. He feels as though in that he wasn't as truthful or honest, and he didn't show as much of himself as he could have shown to his family, and he was very secretive around that. And that has to do with his inability to kind of have his own personal congruence. He felt quite incongruent, and I think this is what this devil card's talking about. He did have this kind of like separation within himself of like these kind of two parts, and I think that's what this 14-15 thing is. It's like one person, bam, another person, and that's what it felt like for his life after that, going up until those years prior to his death. He kind of went on this weird pathway, and in terms of like the learning kind of curve that gave to him within his life, he was very and I know you I feel as though you said in his life he was very good with telling people what he knew they needed to hear in order to make things okay. He was very creative with his dialogue. He was secretive, which I've already said, and if he didn't feel as though he was going to be able to kind of like put on the front or the facade that was needed in the situation, especially with his family, then he would just avoid it entirely, and like you would go days without hearing from him or whatnot. But and that was because he was trying to I don't want to say manipulate, because it wasn't a malicious kind of thing. It was more that he didn't want to hurt you guys. He didn't want to hurt his family, so he kept separate from you guys because he was aware of it. He was uncomfortable around it. And so he would use like really creative words and these sort of like outrageous stories sometimes. And like you may have even sort of thought, oh my God, like this can't be real. Like what is he on about? But really he was kind of doing this because he didn't want to upset you guys. He was trying to like lead this double life really. And if that couldn't happen, then he would just stay away. So within himself, his foundation, personally, in terms of like his family and that, is really, he felt really stable and connected. And I'm saying this up until that 14-year the age of 14, from whatever went on after that. His foundations energetically are really stable. So this isn't something like his life and the way it went isn't something that is anybody else's fault as such. It's not that there was anything lacking. He had really stable energetic foundations from which to build. It's just that this was like the way that his life had to go. And it's nobody's fault, and he does take responsibility at the end, even though he knows and acknowledges that there were at least 2 other people there with him when it happened. It was him. Okay, but foundationally, he recognizes that this is why he's kind of feeling so ashamed about how everything went, and why he would kind of be in and out of your life kind of thing, because he knows that like he was actually better than this, but this is just the way that it went, and at the end of the day, like it just was too much for him to escape from. But in saying that, I do feel as though we've got the 9 of Pentacles here, so actually, creatively and financially, I'm thinking that it feels like with this that he had actually made money from what he was doing in terms of when he died. There was some kind of money around that, and he had actually amassed a deal of money around that, like a living kind of from that, and that is potentially what was controversial when he passed, but he was kind of in a position where he could look back on that and feel quite confident with that financially. So whatever he was doing around that was supporting him. And he was in a position where he'd actually amassed quite a lot. And in terms of like how other people saw that, his friends around him and the community, they recognized that he actually had quite a good head for this, and actually was quite patient and tolerant of other people. And so he kind of like his reputation in terms of this was kind of positive, and as though he was actually quite a good guy to be around, and as though he would actually help out other people around this. So in terms of like what he was doing to earn money, other people saw him as like quite supportive of them, and quite nurturing of them, and as though he was also very patient with them around this. So he didn't have like enemies as such, even though he says, I was on the periphery of quite a lot of heavy shit. There were no enemies for him. He didn't have people who were like after him. Okay. It's just, it was an accident. Like it was an accident for him. He did mention that he'd been drinking, and there was quite a lot going on at that time, in terms of what he was doing physically, what was going on with him, which is why I think this underlying thing physically really kind of compromised that day, his health that day, and that's contributed to this. Now here we've got his health and well-being, and what we've got going on, day-to-day lifestyle. He was like quite busy. He would be out and about a lot, and like I said already, it's funny because in his kind of occupation or whatever it was that he was doing, he was actually perceived by other people, and he did actually present himself and come across as quite a supportive guy, quite nurturing to his friends. I've said nurturing already, but he was like emotionally quite involved with the people that he was involved with. He was quite open with those guys emotionally. I feel as though those people, because you see we've got quite a lot of cards, even in his karmic place we've got the Ace of Cups, so it does feel as though like for him this whole situation, and indeed this incarnation for him, relates to his emotional evolution as a soul, as a spirit. This is like an emotional kind of this is like a way for him to have reached this higher, greater understanding of emotional connections and emotional trust and having faith in people. There may have been a relationship when he was quite young that he felt abandoned or as though he wasn't seen for who he was, or as though he wasn't appreciated for who he was, and he felt like lacking from that person. He felt within himself like he internalized that kind of lacking within himself. So that's what it feels like. Come on, Jeremy. But yeah, so the people that he ended up hanging around and being involved with, like on a day-to-day basis, they kind of like provided like a surrogate kind of relationship here for him with that. Like they were, even though it wasn't ideal and it wasn't his family, but he couldn't be around his family, like around his loved ones, because he felt really he didn't want to kind of like tarnish those relationships with what else was going on in his life. He wanted those relationships with his real loved ones, like his close loved ones, to be really pure. But he was aware that what he was doing was kind of tarnishing that. And I feel as though he probably actually stole from his loved ones over time. And all of these kinds of things were making him feel just, so like really disconnected. And it was really, he didn't want to be doing what he was doing. He was not happy doing what he was doing, but he couldn't stop doing what he was doing because physically he was kind of like stuck with that. He was just like too far into that physically. It was just not letting him kind of come out of it. And the time when he passed was just, it's just the, come on, tell me, man. The time when he passed was just the natural culmination of what he was doing. And it was just like it was kind of bound to happen, he says. It was bound to happen. It was bound to happen. So he is taking responsibility for this, but he understands why he understands why you would want to question that, because it's uncomfortable and it's hurtful to think that that's how he would pass. Because it suggests that you didn't know him enough, or that you didn't quite know who he was, but he recognizes that he wouldn't let you know who he was. So it's nobody's fault, okay? So anyway, this emotional evolution in this lifetime for him is what is really significant for him, because I do get that actually when he came in, he was a really smart kid, really switched on, and like I already said, he was really good with his words, and that's unfortunately he used that kind of, he was a quick thinker and able to kind of like shift his personality to suit the people he was around, so that it never looked suspicious. And he started doing that pretty early on, kind of like moving in and out of these different kind of identities to please people from quite a young age, which is, but he did have like this big internal life going on. Anyway, okay, let's keep going. All right, so in terms of the people he hung out with, what he was doing on a day-to-day basis, he was moving around a lot. He was like really busy. He was engaged in a lot of to and fro. There was a lot of movement around him, a lot of action. He felt really supported by the people he was around, whether or not that was supporting him to evolve, like to be the best version of himself he could be, whatever. Still, within his friendship group, like within the people around him, he did feel supported, and he did feel like they had history and a background, and that was important for him. And they recognized him as a good guy, okay? They did see him as a good guy. He did have a reputation for being like a loving, good-hearted guy. It is significant, obviously, that we've got the world here and the devil here. I think these two major cards are probably the crux of what was going on for him around the time of his death. Obviously, he was really tempted, and he kind of like went with the devil he knew rather than try to pave a new way for himself. And I think that was probably because the people around him were supporting him to stay. It's not like it's when I use the word supportive, what I mean is that they were kind of enabling him to stay in this bind. So it's nobody's fault as such, but it was just like this situation where they made it easy for him to stay where he was within himself, like within his headspace, within his body, within his identity. They were making it easy for him to be in that position. Up there. What's this one up here? What have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 10. Yeah, it does feel like he was actually trying to make a... Okay, so there was definitely something financial going on around him when he passed. There was some kind of choice he was making financially. There was something had begun quite recently for him. Some new financial endeavor had begun. And he had created something. He had built something up financially for himself. And at the time that he passed, he was kind of tossing up what to do around like how he was going to start this new phase with this, what he was going to do, where it was going to go next. So that's quite interesting. And people around him knew that. The people that he was, hanging out with on a day-to-day basis, they were aware that that was going on for him, and that there was something new that was about to happen for him financially that he had actually begun building on. But yeah, it's interesting that he has an ace in his kind of karmic house, his 12th house, the house of hidden things, the house of the unknown. It just feels like, to me, what I can say, and I will get him to clarify, but it does feel as though this lifetime for him, like I've already said, was about learning an emotional progression. Learning some kind of emotional, no, give me a word. Come on, Jeremy. Come in, man. An emotional story, he's saying. Some kind of emotional story for him. So, it was an emotional story. I don't know what that means, but we'll clarify later. Well, we'll clarify now. Okay, we'll clarify now, he says. All right. It's funny because when I was asking him why he had me singing the Our Father, and it was like real old school church, I won't sing it, but he was going, yeah, I believed in God. And I was like, oh, yeah. And he's like, yeah, not like the shit that you do, but like old school God. I was like, yeah, cool, okay. All right, let's clarify now. All right, so he was building his... Okay, this isn't really helping me clarify, man. Can you give me something better? So it's like an emotional story that he was working on for this lifetime, an emotional story, and it was about like creating or constructing some kind of new energy. Oh, okay, all right. So it feels like he's okay. He wants me to talk about creating some kind of new energy within his like lineage, within his family. This new emotional story in his family. He feels as though he's like created some kind of pathway, some kind of emotional avenue, an emotional doorway, he says, an emotional doorway for his family. Thanks, Jeremy. An emotional doorway for his family to explore. So his task here, as well as evolving himself, this emotional story has helped to create this new energetic pathway. Okay, I've got you. This new energetic pathway in his family, in his lineage. So that's, I've never heard that before. That's interesting. So let's look at the his strengths, what he had going for him at the time of his passing. Your strengths at the time of your passing. Strengths. Okay, he was changing this financial. There was some kind of financial thing change up. Got the Five of Pentacles. So there was definitely some kind of new change, some kind of change up in what he was doing financially. Something that had been going on where he'd been quite secure and quite stable financially had changed up. He was definitely looking at something. He was weighing something up financially. He was like balancing something out, making some kind of change, whether he was going to go down this new endeavor or not, whatnot. But it was some kind of, he perceived it as okay, as it was some kind of strength for him, as something. So I do feel like he had some kind of an abundance around him, some kind of I'm not going to say he had like a huge amount of money or a stockpile of money, but he had an abundance at the time of his passing. He had an abundance around him. Obstacles around the time of his passing. He just says, myself, obstacles around the time of his passing. Holy shit, what was that? Oh, okay, so the Four, all right. Definitely some kind of financial situation around his passing, the Four of Pentacles. The obstacle was financial stability. Okay, so he had okay, the obstacle, well, this seems quite contradictory, so you're going to have to help me explain this. His strengths were that he was changing his okay, so his obstacle was, okay, there was a change in his financial position, whatever was going on for him financially within his business, what he was doing to earn money, there was a change. His income had changed. He was weighing up how he was going to go about building a new avenue of income, because he'd come to some kind of a standstill. He was like working really actively to change this up for himself, to create some kind of like new avenue for this, to create a new opportunity for himself, because his financial stability had suddenly come to some kind of an end. The foundations, had come to some kind of an end. Hang on, I'm just going to stop and start again.